There are nights when even God turns his face away. The night of Ava Taylor's 5th wedding anniversary was one of those nights. In a penthouse overlooking Manhattan, the man she called her husband looked straight into her eyes and said, "Marrying you was the biggest mistake of my life. I'd rather marry my dog." Ava didn't cry. She smiled and softly replied, "Good, because from now on, I'll teach you one thing, that some lessons can only be learned when you've lost everything." And just as she said, that rainy night killed a fragile woman, but gave birth to someone new, the woman they call Iron Rose, the Steel Rose of New York. Hello, my dear family, welcome to Iron Rose, When the Sky Clears. A true story from the heart of America about a woman betrayed, broken, and then reborn in the middle of the storm, turning her pain into power. If you've ever been knocked down, stay with me, because this story will remind you storms don't come to destroy us, but to teach us how to stand tall. That night, Manhattan growled like a beast in the dark. Across the sky, lightning tore through the clouds like the slashes of a giant hand. The first storm of the season rolled in with pounding rain and icy wind, hammering against the glass walls of the skyscrapers, turning them into a wailing orchestra of a night no one wanted to face alone. On the 73rd floor of Duffy Tower, where the golden lights always burned brighter than the stars outside, Ava Taylor stood still before a dinner table set for two. She had spent 3 weeks preparing for this night, their 5th wedding anniversary. A simple dinner, but filled with everything she had. His favorite beef bourguignon, a bottle of French wine she had saved for 2 months, and the emerald dress she once dreamed of wearing when they still loved each other. Ethan wasn't home yet. The clock on the wall had passed 8. The vast apartment was silent, as if even the air itself were waiting for a verdict. Ava straightened a wine glass, adjusted the silverware as though that small perfection could somehow save what was silently falling apart. She didn't cry. She never did. Not because she didn't hurt, but because she knew tears could never move someone who no longer saw her as human. The sound of the door opening broke the stillness. The smell of scotch and rain filled the air as Ethan stepped in his coat-soaked, hair clinging to his forehead. He didn't look at her. He walked straight to the bar and poured himself a drink. The light caught the glass, flashing across his face for an instant before shadows swallowed it again. "You're home," Ava said softly, keeping her voice calm. "Yeah." He took a sip. "What's with all this? Someone's birthday?" "No. Our 5th anniversary." "No." He gave a low laugh, not cold, not bitter, just empty. "Anniversary? What do we even have to celebrate?" Ava swallowed hard, her chest tightening. "I just thought, maybe we could start over." "Start over?" He turned, eyes hard as steel. "Ava, do you even know what people say about me? They ask how a man like me could ever marry a girl from Brooklyn, no family, no pedigree, no degrees. Do you know how many times I've had to hear the whispers when they look at you?" She stood still, fingers gripping the edge of the table. "I know, but I've never been ashamed of that." "Well, I am." The words fell softly, like rain, but every syllable cut deep. Ava looked at her husband, the man who once kissed her forehead in their tiny apartment, who once said, "I love you because you're real." Now, under the golden light that made his tired face look older, he seemed like a stranger entirely. "Ethan, don't do this. We used to." "No, we never had anything." He set the glass down, voice low but sharp as metal. "I used to think marrying you was an act of kindness, a way to prove that love could transcend class. But I was wrong. You never belonged in my world. You say 'excuse me' to waiters like you're apologizing for existing. You wear cheap perfume and think it's elegant. You don't even know how to hold a wine glass. You're a walking apology, Ava, a mistake I've dragged out too long." Thunder crashed outside, as if the sky itself answered. Ava felt her heart crack open, but she didn't let him see. "Are you done?" she asked quietly. "Not yet." He lifted his phone and dialed. A woman's voice, his mother's, came through the speaker. "She's still there, Ethan?" "Yes, Mother." "Then end it. You've proven your point. Compassion has its limits. Don't let her cling any longer." Ava felt the blood drain from her face. The room spun, but she stayed upright. When Ethan hung up, she spoke, her voice low but steady as steel. "You think I'll cry, don't you? Beg you not to leave." He smirked. "What else can you do?" "You're wrong." Ava stepped closer, meeting his eyes. "I'll teach you something you'll never forget. The silence of a woman who's done trying, is the loudest verdict of all. She turned, grabbed her coat, and opened the door. Cold wind rushed in, carrying the roar of the rain. "Ava," Ethan called after her. "Don't come back." She paused at the doorway, her hair already wet from the storm. "You're right," she whispered. "I won't, because the woman I was is dead." The door closed, and the thunder sounded like a farewell. The stairwell was freezing, smelling of rust and wet metal. Ava descended one step at a time, her heels slipping on the damp stairs. Below her, the city was drowning in rain and light. She carried nothing, no money, no phone, no plan. Only herself, and a heart freshly buried in the storm. By the time she reached the street, the water was up to her ankles. Taxis slid past, headlights scattering over puddles. Ava walked down the avenue, wind whipping her dress against her skin. Every step burned, but she didn't stop. Ethan's voice echoed in her mind, his, and Margaret's then faded. Only the rain remained. The rain was washing away every layer of pretense she'd once tried to believe. A group of people huddled under an awning stared at her like she was mad. A woman in an evening gown, walking through the downpour with no umbrella, no direction. But Ava felt freer than ever. For the first time in 5 years, no one could tell her what to do. She turned into an alley, where neon lights blurred in the rain. A soaked cat hid beneath a trash bin, its eyes glowing in the dark. Ava crouched, whispering, "We're both drenched, huh?" Then laughed a rough, broken laugh, but real. She stopped in front of a dark shop window. In the reflection, she saw herself, hair plastered down, mascara streaked, hem torn. She looked at that woman for a long time, then murmured, "You're dead, but I'm still alive." Her next steps led her away from glittering Midtown, down streets that grew dimmer, until the sign, Crown Heights, Brooklyn, appeared, a gateway to another world. There was no gold there, only the breath of reality, burnt pizza, sirens, and the flicker of old apartment lights. Ava found a cheap motel on Street John Avenue. The owner, a black woman in her 50s, looked her over with wary compassion. "You're in the wrong neighborhood, lady. I just need a place to sleep," Ava said softly. "Just for tonight." The woman sighed and tossed her a key. "Room 12. If the rats bother you, nudge 'em away. Around here, we all survive on a little kindness." Oh, the room smelled of mold and bleach. Cracked walls, a leaking ceiling, but there was a bed and light. Ava sat down, her hands trembling from the cold. She slipped off her soaked heels, revealing red, swollen feet. Outside, the storm raged on. The wind whispered through the door, cracks like voices in the dark. Ava pulled the blanket around her, eyes fixed on the ceiling. In that darkness, she could hear her heartbeat, slow, weak, but steady, and she knew that sound was survival. She thought of Ethan's words, each still sharp as thorns. But amid the ache, a thought surfaced. What if he's right? What if I really am nothing? Then her own voice, tired but unbroken, answered back. "Then I'll become something, even if it's from ashes." Ava sat up, dug out a crumpled scrap of paper from her purse and an eyeliner pencil. She began to draw rough lines of a dress, not one for parties, but for a woman who needed to stand tall. Strong shoulders, high collar, thick fabric, more armor than adornment. It was the first sketch of Iron Rose, though she didn't yet know its name. Outside, the thunder drifted away. The rain softened. Ava set down the pencil, leaned back against the wall, and closed her eyes. In the darkness, she dreamed of light refracted through 1,000 raindrops like tiny mirrors reflecting a soul reborn. That night, Manhattan drowned in rain, but among millions of soaked city lights, a small one flickered to life in room 12 of Crown Heights. And that light belonged to a woman who had died once and chosen to live again in the fiercest way possible. The next morning, the pale early sunlight filtered through the thin curtain, falling across Ava Taylor's tired face. She opened her eyes in a room barely half the size of her old bathroom in Manhattan. The air smelled of dampness, bleach, and rust, the scent of rock bottom, but also of beginnings. On a warped wooden table lay a few crumpled bills from her soaked wallet. She counted them again and again, $13. She'd never imagined there would come a day she'd have to choose between a meal and a bus ride. But this was reality, and reality had no patience for pride. She changed out of the dried, stained evening dress into a forgotten t-shirt someone had left behind. The jeans were torn at the knee, but at least they fit. Looking into the cracked mirror, Ava let out a faint laugh. "I look like a background character in my own life," she whispered. But slowly, her reflection shifted no longer pity, but a cold kind of clarity. Outside, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Laughter, arguments, and a baby crying. The boarding house was a noisy hive, full of people too small for a city too big, all trying to survive. Ava stepped into the corridor and met the landlady from the night before, Naomi Brooks, dressed in her nurse scrubs, eyes dark with exhaustion. "You're still here?" Naomi asked, wary but not unkind. "I'll pay for tonight," Ava said quietly. "Don't make promises. Just don't bother the neighbors. Everyone here's already tired of life enough." Ava nodded. "I understand." By noon, she was out searching for work across Crown Heights. No one wanted to hire someone with no papers, no resume, no past that made sense. As the air grew colder, she ducked into a small cafe on the corner of Nostrand Avenue, hoping for a waitress job. She was turned down, but the barista, a young Latina woman named Rosa Martinez, handed her a lukewarm cappuccino. "Here, it's nothing fancy, but it's warm." Ava sat at a wooden stool, the cup trembling slightly in her hands. Outside, people passed by coats thick, eyes cold. In New York, everyone was too busy surviving to notice anyone else. But Rosa's gaze held no pity, no curiosity, just quiet humanity. And somehow, that made the world a little lighter. That evening, Naomi came home, her hands rough and cracked from sanitizer. She saw Ava sitting in the corner, mending a torn shirt with safety pins. "What did you use to do for a living?" Naomi asked. Ava looked up. "I used to be somebody's wife." Naomi chuckled softly. "That's not a job." I know," Ava replied. "I'm learning a new one, staying alive." Naomi was silent for a moment, then poured boiling water into a mug. "Come with me tomorrow. The Brownsville Community Center needs an extra pair of hands. The pay's low, but lunch is free. The kids there could use someone like you." "Like me? To teach what?" "Anything, as long as you have patience." That night, Ava lay awake listening to the thin rain tapping the tin roof. She didn't know what the future held, but at least tomorrow she had somewhere to go. And maybe that was what starting over looked like. The Brownsville Community Center stood in a faded yellow building with peeling paint. Children ran around clutching crayons, some barefoot, all laughing. Ava stood in the middle of the cramped room, heart racing not from fear, but from feeling small. Naomi introduced her to the manager. "This is Ava. She studied art." "When?" Ava blinked in surprise, then smiled faintly. "Yes, I can teach basic drawing." The manager, Mrs. Johnson, mother of a little girl named Chloe, gave Ava a quick once-over, her eyes lingering on the calluses on Ava's hands. "We can't pay much. $40 a week, free lunch." "That's enough," Ava said softly. "I don't need more." In her first class, she handed out scraps of old newspaper. "Draw anything that makes you happy," she told them. A little boy raised his hand. "Can I draw a storm, miss?" Ava smiled. "Of course. Just don't forget to add some light." She taught them how to blend colors, how to turn stains into sky. And as she watched them, Ava realized the children had something she'd lost, the simple faith that beauty could still exist, even in a blue crayon streaked across a wrinkled page. During break, Chloe, a bright-eyed girl with braided hair, peeked at Ava's sketch. "You're drawing someone walking in the rain." "Yes," Ava said. "I'm used to the rain." "Are you drawing to forget somebody?" Ava stayed silent. Chloe said softly, "My mom says if you draw sadness long enough, it gets tired and goes to sleep." Ava laughed a real, quiet laugh. "Maybe I should try that." The days passed. Ava taught art, songs, and how to fold paper roses with broken crayons. She felt herself changing. Each afternoon, as sunset filtered through the dusty windows, she could almost feel the pain inside her slowly dissolving. At night, Naomi came home late, and Rosa cooked porridge for them all. 3 women, 3 broken stories, gathered around a plastic table sharing warmth and laughter that felt rare and real. "Storm's coming tomorrow," Rosa said. "Hope it doesn't flood again." Ava looked out the window, heart tightening. Storms still carried ghosts for her, but this time she wasn't afraid. That night, she redrew the old sketch, the dress with strong shoulders and a high collar, like armor. Beneath it, she wrote 2 small words in pencil: "Iron Rose." Rosa glanced over her shoulder. That's a beautiful name. Ava's voice was soft but sure. It's for a rose that never breaks even in the rain. The next morning, the sky was heavy with clouds. Ava pulled on a thin coat and stepped into the chill. On her way to the center, the wind howled between the red brick buildings. A stray newspaper blew across her path, its headline screaming, "Real estate tycoon Daniel Henry in critical accident on Williamsburg Bridge." Ava froze. The photo showed a crushed car, twisted and soaked from the rain. She stared at it for a long time, her heart suddenly pounding. The cold wind crept down her collar, bringing back the memory of another storm, another man lost in the rain. She didn't know yet, but within hours, that very storm would lead her to Daniel. In the space between life and death, one shattered heart would reach out to save another barely beating one. And that would be the beginning of the storm that changed everything, the next chapter in the rebirth of the woman once known as Ava Taylor. That afternoon, New York turned the color of steel, as if the sky itself were about to collapse. Weather reports warned of a catastrophic storm, one of the biggest since 2012. People rushed home, supermarkets overflowed, and subways came to a halt. But in Brownsville, no one had the luxury of being afraid. Life went on. Rent was due, shifts awaited. Storms didn't pause the world for people with low incomes. Ava folded the morning paper, the headline about billionaire Daniel Henry's car crash still echoing in her mind. A man that powerful brought down in an instant by nature. She didn't know why the image stayed with her. Maybe because she knew what it was like to be destroyed not by a storm in the sky, but by one wearing a human face. She pulled on her thin raincoat, determined to go to the community center and move the kids' art supplies before the flood hit. "You're crazy, Ava," Naomi called from the doorway. "It's a storm." "I'll be quick," Ava said. "The kids' drawings are still there. I can't let the water ruin them." Naomi shook her head, half exasperated, half fond. "If you're going to be crazy, at least it's for the kids." By the time Ava stepped outside, the wind was already howling. The sky darkened, swallowing the city like the belly of a giant beast. Rain struck the pavement, sharp and cold. She tightened her hood and bent forward, wading through rising puddles. At the Atlantic Avenue intersection, a sound shattered the storm, the screech of metal, the crash of glass, an unmistakable sound. An accident. People stopped, phones raised, some screaming. On the Williamsburg Bridge, a black SUV had spun out and slammed into a light pole, its front end crushed like tin. Fire burst from the hood. Ava froze. Lightning flashed overhead. Around her, no one moved closer. They just stood there, afraid, waiting for police, waiting for someone else to act. Then came a faint voice from inside the wreckage. "Help! Help me!" And Ava ran. Rain lashed her face like needles. She sprinted through traffic, slipping across the slick bridge, gripping the guardrail as she neared the burning car. The door was jammed. Through the shattered window, she saw a man slumped over, the wheel blood down his temple, seatbelt cutting into his chest. She pounded on the glass. "Can you hear me? You're still alive, right?" No answer. Just a weak, shallow breath. She yanked the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Frantically, she looked around, found a bent metal bar, and smashed it into the window. The glass shattered, spraying her arms. She reached in, tore the seatbelt loose, slicing her hand open, but didn't stop. "Don't you dare die," she whispered through the rain. "You're not allowed to die." A small explosion burst from the engine. Ava panicked, dragged the man out of the car, pulling him across the wet pavement just as flames roared behind them. She cradled him in her arms, the rain mixing with the blood on her skin, running pink down the street. In the flash of lightning, she saw his face, younger than she'd imagined, familiar from the papers. Daniel Henry, the man of skyscrapers, of smiling photos beside presidents, of luxury headlines. And now, lying broken and human in her lap. Ava pressed her palms to his chest, giving CPR, her hands trembling but steady. Each compression, she whispered, "Breathe. You hear me? Breathe." This one, she didn't know why she was crying. Maybe because in his stillness, she saw herself the same loneliness, the same silence of being left behind by the world. Sirens wailed in the distance. When the paramedics arrived, Ava sat slumped on the asphalt, soaked through, rain and sweat and tears indistinguishable. A nurse knelt beside her. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Ava nodded weakly, pointing at Daniel. "Help him. Don't let him die. We'll take care of him. You're bleeding." "It's fine. I can still feel." "He can't." She watched as they placed an oxygen mask over his mouth and lifted him onto a stretcher. When the ambulance doors closed, Ava caught one last glimpse of his face through rain-smeared glass, the face of a man barely clinging to life. One who was dying, and one who already had meeting in the same storm. When the sirens faded, Ava stood alone on the bridge, wind whipping her hair, her clothes plastered to her skin. Above her, lightning tore open the clouds, and she knew, with bone-deep certainty, her life had just turned down a road with no return. That night, Ava was kept at the hospital as a witness. She sat in a white hallway, raincoat wrinkled, hair stuck to her face. Doctors moved back and forth, the smell of disinfectant blending with the faint scent of wet pavement. The clock ticked slowly every minute, dragging like an eternity. A young doctor finally approached. "He made it. If it weren't for you, he wouldn't have." Ava looked up, eyes glinting with something strange. Not joy, not relief, just quiet disbelief. "He's awake?" "Not yet, but his heart steady. Daniel Henry, right?" "Yes," she whispered. "I only recognized him from the news." The doctor smiled faintly. "The whole city knows him. But tonight, he's just a man who a stranger saved." Ava glanced down at her bandaged hands still stained with traces of blood and ash. The memory of the explosion, the flicker of his pulse, still burned behind her eyes. In that moment, she hadn't thought about class or power or names. She'd only thought, "Hold on." Naomi arrived with dry clothes, shaking her head. "What were you thinking, Ava? The city's flooding, and you go out to save someone." Ava smiled faintly. "I wasn't thinking. I just couldn't stand still." Naomi sighed, sitting beside her. "Maybe God sent him to you, or sent me to him." Ava looked out the window. "Sometimes, when we save someone, we're really saving ourselves." 2 days later, Daniel woke up. He opened his eyes to the soft light of a hospital room. The first thing he saw was Ava asleep in the chair beside his bed, head resting on her arm. She looked exhausted, but peaceful. Her hands were wrapped in white gauze. "Who is she?" he rasped. A nurse smiled. "The woman who saved your life. Hasn't left your side since that night." Daniel watched her quietly. He didn't understand why a stranger would stay, or why her face when she stirred awake felt both fragile and unshakable. "You're awake," Ava said softly, as if afraid to disturb the silence. "You're who?" "No one," she said. "Just someone passing through the storm." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just live. That's enough." Daniel turned to the window. Outside, the rain had stopped. A thin beam of sunlight pierced the clouds, gleaming over the drenched skyline. He looked back and asked quietly, "Do you believe in fate?" Ava smiled faintly. "Not much, but I do believe that sometimes the rain falls so people can find each other." And in that moment, as their eyes met, something stirred between them, something old and something new. Not love, not yet, just a quiet recognition. Two souls once broken by storms, now seeing themselves reflected in each other, both still standing, both still alive. Morning sunlight spilled through the expansive windows of Mount Sinai Hospital, golden and soft, glinting off the polished white floors like mirrors. Everything was unnervingly quiet. Only the steady beep of the heart monitor broke the stillness, a small, stubborn reminder that life, though fragile, refused to give up. Daniel Henry had been lying there for nearly a week. The storm had passed, leaving behind flooded streets and broken glass, but inside him, something else had collapsed, and from those ruins, something unfamiliar was beginning to rise. When he was finally lucid, the doctors told him, "If that woman hadn't been there, you wouldn't have made it." He asked for her name, but the nurse only shrugged in response. She wouldn't give any details, just said her name was Ava. Ava, a simple name, but it kept looping in his mind like a haunting refrain. He remembered her face in the rain, hair matted, eyes unwavering, hands bloodied yet determined, holding on to him as if she were gripping her own life too. On the third day after waking, Daniel stepped out onto the small balcony outside his hospital room. The city lay quiet beneath the grey sky. His buildings, the Henry Towers that once filled him with pride, still stood, tall and perfect, cold and soulless. He had built the city, yet somehow forgotten how to make meaning. She saved me. Why? He wondered. What kind of woman ran toward fire in a storm to save a stranger? He began to search. His assistant checked reports, security footage, and witness statements. Nothing, no record of an Ava Taylor, no address, no social media, just one witness saying, "A thin woman in a green raincoat disappeared as soon as the ambulance left." The not knowing gnawed at him, not just the debt, but the mystery, the need to understand, the kind of courage that refused to look away. And then, fate spoke again. A week later, while walking down the corridor, Daniel heard the sound of children laughing. He followed it to the pediatric wing, and there she was, Ava. She was wearing an old nurse's uniform, Naomi's, though he didn't know that, sitting cross-legged among the kids, teaching them how to draw with wax crayons. Her bandaged hands moved carefully, gracefully. The light caught her face as she smiled down at a little girl, showing her how to color the sundae. Daniel froze. She was the same woman from that storm, but this time, she was standing in the light. He stepped inside. The laughter quieted. Ava turned, surprise flickering across her face, before she smiled faintly. "You've recovered." "I have," he said, "and I owe you more than I can ever repay." "You don't owe me anything. I only did what anyone should." He studied her in silence. "I've met hundreds of people, politicians, investors, actors, the powerful, but no one's ever looked at me the way you did that night. Not with fear, not curiosity, focus." "Why?" Ava looked down at her hands. "Because I've already died once, and I know what it feels like to be forgotten." The answer struck him speechless. She turned back to the children, as if their exchange were nothing more than a passing line in a longer story. But Daniel knew he would never forget it or her. That afternoon, he was discharged. Before leaving, he left her an envelope, no money, just a silver-embossed business card from Henry Properties, and a single handwritten line. "If you ever need anything, work, a home, or just a cup of coffee, call me. This isn't repayment, it's gratitude." Ava stared at the card. She didn't trust kindness from the rich. Yet there had been no pity in his eyes, no guilt, only the quiet sincerity of a man trying to rebuild something inside himself. 3 days later, Naomi fell ill, and the community center's leaking roof threatened to shut them down. Ava picked up the card again. "Just one call, Ava." Henry speaking. His voice was low, rough. When he heard her name, he paused. "Ava, I didn't think you'd call. I'm not calling for a favor, but you said you could help." "Of course. What do you need?" "Not for me, for the Brownsville Community Center. The roof's damaged. The kids have nowhere to learn." "Enf." Daniel smiled faintly through the phone. "Send me the address." The next afternoon, he came not in a tailored suit, but in rolled-up sleeves and worn shoes. When he walked in, the small classroom seemed to brighten. The children gasped. "He's the man from TV." Ava flushed, but Daniel just laughed and crouched beside Chloe. "And you must be the girl who drew the biggest sun in the room, right?" The room was filled with laughter, and Ava realized that even in a cold world, some people still knew how to bring warmth wherever they went. As he was leaving, Daniel turned to her. "Have you ever thought about going back to art? I don't belong in that world anymore." "Maybe not, but maybe that world needs someone like you." A few days later, a small delivery truck arrived at the community center. Inside were boxes of new paints, brushes, sketchbooks, no name attached. But Ava knew. She sat alone in the freshly painted room, breathing in the scent of new beginnings. Her gaze fell on her old sketch, the woman walking through the rain, holding a steel rose. Ava traced the edge of the paper and whispered, "Maybe real grace isn't about money. Maybe it's the chance to begin again." Outside, the last light of day faded over Brooklyn, and somewhere in the vast city, Daniel Henry, the man who had once been saved, was quietly planning how to repay his life's debt in another way, by investing in the woman who had saved him, even though she had never asked for a thing. March in New York always smelled like beginnings. Short bursts of rain washed away the dust of winter, and fresh green leaves peeked shyly from the dark branches lining Brooklyn's streets. At one graffiti-stained corner, where litter clung to the curb, an old warehouse stood waiting to be reborn, a forgotten shell Daniel Henry had just purchased. When Ava followed him there for the first time, she couldn't believe it. "You're sure this is where you want me to work?" "Not work," Daniel said, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the space. "Create something." Inside, The ceiling stretched high, its steel beams rusted with time, dust floating through broken panes of glass that cast uneven patches of sunlight on the floor. Ava strolled, her fingers brushing over the chipped paint on the wall, cold, but alive. "This used to be a textile factory in the 50s, Daniel said. "Now it's yours. If you want it." She turned sharply. "What did you say?" "I'll invest. You lead. I won't interfere or ask for profit. Just one condition: make it into something you believe in." She studied him for a long moment. "Why?" He smiled, small and sincere. "Because someone once saved my life, and I want to see what you'll build if you're given the chance to save your own." Ava didn't answer, but that night, back in her small room, she sat for hours by the window, watching the rain streak the glass, her old iron rose sketch in hand, the one she had drawn years ago, of the armor-like dress. Its strong shoulders, high collar, and thick fabric came alive again in her mind. She saw Naomi, Rosa, all the women she'd met, bent back from work, tired but still yearning to feel strong. Not dresses for the powerful, but for those who had once been powerless. The next morning, she returned to the warehouse and found Daniel speaking with electricians. "I'll do it," she said, "but I do everything my way." "That's the only reason I asked you," he replied. In the days that followed, the warehouse transformed. Daniel hired a few workers. Ava did the rest herself, painting, scrubbing, polishing. She chose light colors: white, ash gray, and soft wood, as if she wanted sunlight to linger there a little longer. Naomi and Rosa came to help. "You've lost your mind," Rosa laughed, carrying a box of paint. "From a boarding house to a factory." "Maybe," Ava said, smiling, "but I'm tired of living small. Just once, I want to live big." "That's a Zof." At night, after everyone left, Ava stayed listening to old jazz on a crackling radio, sketching under a single lamp. Daniel often dropped by late, bringing hot coffee. He never interrupted, just sat across from her in quiet companionship, two people who no longer needed words to understand each other. One night, Daniel asked, "Do you ever think about what your life would have been if that storm hadn't happened?" Ava kept drawing, smiling faintly. "I'd still be locked in a fancy apartment, dying slowly in silence. Maybe the storm was how God decided to wake me up." "And me," Daniel said. "Without that storm, I'd still think I was invincible." Ava looked up at him, his face softened by the warm light. "Funny. Two people who already died, learning to live again together." Daniel nodded. "Maybe that's why people who've died once are the best at starting over." "That's." And in that dim golden light, between the scent of paint and iron rose was conceived not in noise or glory, but in quiet persistence and the belief that beauty can grow from ruin. 2 months later, the first stitches were sewn. Ava set up an old sewing machine by the window, sunlight spilling over the table. Naomi cut fabric, Rosa cooked lunch, and Daniel brought coffee and ledgers, always letting her decide everything. "Do you need anything else?" he'd ask. "Just time," she'd answer. The first iron rose design was a charcoal gray coat featuring strong shoulders, sharp lines, and a high collar that hid the chin, lined with soft lace inside, like a second skin. When Ava tried it on, Naomi gasped, "You look like a general." Ava laughed. "No, I want to look like someone who's not afraid anymore." Daniel stepped closer, eyes steady. "And you do." Ava lowered her gaze, heart trembling with something warm and terrifying. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Women from the working blocks began coming to her shop, asking for clothes that made them feel strong. They didn't come for charity, they came because they saw themselves in her designs. One afternoon, Chloe burst into the workshop, holding a small gray jacket. "Miss Ava, Mom says wearing this feels like armor." Ava knelt, smiling. "That's because your mum's already brave. I just helped her see it." The story traveled faster than they imagined. A local fashion blogger wrote, "A new label from Brooklyn where fashion isn't about glamour, but about power." Daniel read the article, smiling as he looked across the room at Ava, bent over her sewing machine. "You just did something people spend lifetimes chasing," he said. "It's just a few coats," she murmured. "No, it's hope." That night, he took her to the rooftop of the warehouse. From there, Manhattan shimmered like a sea of gold. "Look," Daniel said, calling her M for the first time, naturally, softly. "All those towers used to be my dreams, But tonight I think the real dream is down there, in that little workshop. Ava laughed. You sound like a poet without a paycheck. I could live with that as long as you're in the poem. She fell silent. The silence between them was profound and tender. Daniel, she said gently, don't say things you're not sure of. I'm not sure about the future, he replied, but I'm sure about how I feel when I look at you. Ava turned away, eyes on the street far below. Something inside her softened a small crack in the armor she'd built, but she was still afraid. Her past, her scars, the nights she'd drowned in shame, they were all still there, just under the surface. The night wind carried the hum of the sewing machine from inside. She whispered, almost to herself, what if Iron Rose fails? Then we start over, Daniel said. That's what steel roses do, remember? And for the first time in a long time, Ava laughed, a real bright laugh that rose into the night, light and clear, drifting over the sleeping city. From that night on, Iron Rose was officially born. Not just a fashion brand, but a symbol for everyone who had once fallen, yet chose to rise again. Just like Ava Taylor and Daniel Henry, two souls once shattered by storms, now learning how to weave dreams together in the city that never sleeps. Summer in Manhattan. Not the golden kind, but the heavy, airless kind, when heat clings to every glass tower and turns the city into a furnace. People walk fast, talk fast, live fast and fall just as fast. Ethan Duffy sat in his 40th floor office, tie loosened, eyes hollow. His desk was buried under papers, his phone buzzed non-stop, and from behind the door came his assistant's trembling voice. Mr. Duffy, the shareholders are demanding an emergency meeting. The Wall Street Journal ran another piece this morning. Ethan didn't answer. He just stared out at the hazy skyline, where sunlight blurred the edges of the towers he once owned a part of. On his computer screen glowed the headline, Ethan Duffy, the arrogant face of Wall Street's collapse. The article leaked his private emails messages mocking women, cruel jokes about female employees, and one line that made his stomach twist. Even my ex-wife, the broke little Brooklyn girl, was just a ladder I outgrew. The entire city read it, and laughed. Ethan slammed the phone down. Where's Whitmore? He barked. Mr. Whitmore pulled out, the assistant stammered. He's investing in something called Iron Rose. Ethan froze. Iron. What? Iron Rose Incorporated, sir. A fashion brand founded by Ava Taylor. She's everywhere now. The media is calling her a modern symbol of American womanhood. He swayed, as if the name itself had struck him in the chest. Ava Taylor. He opened his laptop and typed her name. Dozens of articles filled the screen. Ava Taylor, from abandoned wife to icon of strength. Iron Rose. Fashion for women who fell but stood back up. And at the center of it all, her photo, wearing a charcoal gray coat, shoulders strong, eyes steady, a faint smile on her lips. No trace of the trembling woman who once stood before him in the rain. Ethan let out a bitter laugh, but it caught in his throat. She actually did it. The laugh faded, replaced by ragged breaths. He sank into his chair, sweat gathering at his temples. All he could see was that last night the green dress clinging to her skin, her calm eyes when she said, "The woman I was is dead." Odu. The phone rang again. This time, it was Margaret, his mother. Her voice was cold, clipped. You've disgraced this family, Ethan. The board is removing you from Duffy Group, effective immediately. Mother, don't call me that. From now on, you stand alone. And remember this, don't you dare blame the woman you killed with your words. The line went dead. The office suddenly felt cavernous. Ethan's gaze fell on a photo on his desk, their wedding picture in Central Park. Ava smiles, and he is proud. He picked it up, meaning to put it away, but couldn't. Rage surged. He hurled the frame to the floor. Glass shattered. A shard bounced up and sliced his palm. A thin line of blood welled up, small, but real. He stared at it, then gave a strangled laugh. So tell me, Ava, he muttered, who's pitiful now? That night, he left the building under another summer storm. No one followed. No one cared. Once, he had stood on top of Wall Street. Now, he walked unseen through the rain, just another shadow in a city that had already forgotten his name. Meanwhile, in Brooklyn, Iron Rose buzzed with life. The whir of sewing machines blended with soft jazz and the smell of new fabric and coffee. Ava stood in the bright workshop, wearing a white shirt with rolled sleeves and a tape measure around her neck, adjusting the shoulders of a model, one of the workers. "Lift your chin, Jody. Don't be afraid of sharp lines. They don't make you hard, they make you confident." Jody smiled at her reflection. "I've never seen myself like this before." "That's because you never dared to look," Ava said, her voice warm and sure. Daniel watched from nearby. He rarely interfered with her work, but every time he saw her like this, commanding, alive, something in him softened. She wasn't just making clothes, she was building belief. That afternoon, Iron Rose held its first press event right there in the workshop. Reporters filled the space, camera flashes bursting like stars. Ava looked nervous, but Daniel whispered, "Just talk like you do with the kids at the center. They're children too, only these carry microphones." She laughed, then stepped onto the small stage. "We don't make fashion to show off," she began, voice clear and even. "We make it to remind women they don't need to be perfect to be beautiful. We've all been weak, we've all been hurt, but that's exactly where strength begins." Silence, then thunderous applause. Daniel watched her, seeing in her eyes what he'd once lost: faith. Genuine, human faith. That night, Ava's speech spread across every news outlet. Social media crowned her the Iron Rose Woman. And in a small rented apartment in Queens, Ethan watched the video alone. Her voice filled the dim room. "No one is born to be small forever. We need one moment of courage to rise again." He turned off the screen and threw the phone to the side. The room was dark, littered with unpaid bills, ashtrays, and empty bottles. Outside, rain began to fall once more. But this time, he didn't see the rain as an enemy. Because now, he understood the rain doesn't destroy anyone. It simply reveals what was already rotting underneath. He lifted his eyes toward the blurred window, whispering into the storm, "You won, Ava. And if you're pleased, then maybe, for the first time in my life, I don't regret losing." Autumn came to Brooklyn. The trees along Eastern Parkway turned gold, their leaves falling like soft tickets back to a peaceful past. Iron Rose still glowed late into the night. Through the windows, silhouettes moved quietly, Naomi checking fabric, Rosa balancing the books, and Ava sitting at her desk, chewing the end of her pencil, eyes lost in thought. Daniel walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You skipped dinner again." "I'm not hungry. Not hungry, but thinner." He set the cup in front of her. "I don't like thin people." Ava let out a raspy laugh. "You don't get to like or dislike. I'm your business partner, not your model." "But I'm the man you once saved," Daniel said, sipping his coffee, eyes steady on her. "And the saved man has the right to worry about his savior." She smiled, but something fluttered quietly in her chest. Lately, Daniel has come by the workshop more often, not just to check on progress. He sat with her to read through emails, offered edits to her speeches, or made coffee in silence. Between them stretched an unspoken thread, thin but sure, connecting 2 people who had both broken once. Not hurried, not desperate, just quietly there. One weekend night, after a long day's work, they stood together on the rooftop. Above them, Manhattan glimmered like a trail of stars. Ava wore a new Iron Rose coat, a steaming cup of tea in her hand. "Did you ever think," she asked, "that people like us who once lost everything could sit here like this, talking in peace?" Daniel leaned on the railing, eyes soft. "No. I used to think peace was something other people got. Now I know it's something you train for like a muscle." She laughed. "You still say strange, poetic things like you did when we first met." "They're not strange," he said, his voice low. "Every time I talk to you, everything makes sense." Ava fell Keat. She stared at her own hands, roughened by needles and thread, trembling slightly. She wanted to believe him, but fear still lived deep inside her. Fear that the past might find her again, that her heart couldn't bear another fall. "Daniel," she whispered, "don't look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like someone ready to love again." He lowered his gaze, smiling faintly. "Maybe I'm not ready. It's just, when I'm with you, I forget I was ever broken." "Len." Ava turned away, though her lips curved upward. Something warm began to uncoil inside her, a softness she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. That night, they said nothing more. They stood side by side, watching the city lights shimmer below, the wind carrying the scent of coffee and the warmth of iron from the workshop. The world outside felt distant, and for the first time, both of them thought they had found. When Iron Rose turned 1 year old, Daniel suggested a small celebration. No media, he said. Just the people who built this with us. Ava agreed. They held the party right there in the old warehouse. Strings of golden lights hanging from the ceiling. Long wooden tables laid with pastries and wine. Naomi wore the first iron rose dress ever made. Rosa her rose-pink jacket. And Ava, of course, her favorite color. Ash gray. You should wear something brighter, Naomi teased. Gray makes you look like the weather. Ava smiled. Storms have their own beauty. End of quote. But you're at peace now. Ava glanced toward Daniel across the room, talking with guests. Not quite. But at least, I'm no longer afraid of storms. The night buzzed with laughter and soft music. Chloe, the little girl who once took her art class, ran up to Ava with a painting in her hands. It showed Ava in her iron rose coat, standing in the rain, surrounded by light. Ava knelt, eyes glistening. Chloe, it's beautiful. End of quote. You told me once, the girl said, that if you draw sadness long enough, it falls asleep. I painted this so you'd remember you taught me that. Ava pulled her into a hug, her throat tightening. When everyone left, only she and Daniel remained to clear the tables. Glasses clinked softly. The golden lights cast long shadows on the walls. See, Daniel said quietly. We've come a long way. Ava smiled. Yes, and no one would believe it all started with a storm. Well, he set his glass down, stepped closer. Ava, his voice trembled just a little. I'm not good with big words, but I know this since you walked into my life. I haven't needed anything else to feel alive. Ava's eyes filled. Daniel, don't say anything, he interrupted softly. If you're not ready, I'll wait. Why? Because some people are worth waiting for, and I think you're one of them. The silence that followed was deep, gentle. Only slow jazz hummed from an old speaker. Ava stepped closer, brushing her fingers lightly against his sleeve. I'm not promising anything, she whispered. But if one day I can believe in love again, maybe I'll start with you. Daniel smiled, saying nothing. He took her hand and held it carefully, as one has something fragile and precious. Outside, light rain began to fall soft, steady, washing the air clean. Ava looked up and smiled. This rain didn't make her tremble anymore. It made her feel alive. And perhaps, in that quiet moment between the scent of paint, the golden light, and the whisper of rain, two hearts that had once been broken finally came back to life. 2 years later, a crystal-clear winter morning in Manhattan. Snow fell softly, layering rooftops and sidewalks in white like dreams that hadn't yet melted away. Iron Rose was no longer the small name born in a Brooklyn warehouse. Its new headquarters stood proudly on Madison Avenue, 8 stories of glass and steel, crowned with a silver-engraved logo, a blooming iron rose that caught the morning light. The press called it a miracle of resolve. Ava Taylor, the woman who once walked out of a broken marriage with nothing but her hands, now appeared on the cover of Time magazine, in her signature ash-gray suit, eyes calm, strong, almost kind. Beneath her photo read, "The woman who reinvented strength." That morning, Daniel entered her office, same as always, simple suit, white shirt, hot coffee in hand. Ava was signing papers, head slightly bowed, her hair pinned neatly. He set a cup beside her and said quietly, "The new issue's out. They're calling you the icon of a new era." Ava smiled faintly without looking up. That sounds more frightening than flattering. Why? Because icons aren't allowed to make mistakes. Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he said, "You've forgotten, haven't you? Iron Rose wasn't born from perfection. It was born from wreckage. And wreckage is the most human thing there is." She finally looked at him, eyes deep and warm. "You always know how to make people breathe easier." He smiled. "That's my job." "No," she said softly. "Your job is making numbers feel something." They both laughed, but behind their laughter lingered something quieter. In 2 years, they'd built everything together side by side through deadlines, crises, and triumphs. But the brighter the lights grew, the farther apart their worlds seemed to drift. She was now the woman the world called a living legend. He was the man who stood behind her, making sure she didn't fall. That afternoon, Ava sat in a meeting with global investors. Among them was Candice, CEO of a major international retail group. "We want to take Iron Rose worldwide," she said. "Tokyo, Paris, Milan, London. Ava, you'll need to split your time between New York and Europe." The room erupted in applause. Ava smiled, thanked them, but her gaze slipped to Daniel at the end of the table, hands tight around his coffee cup, saying nothing. That night, when they stepped out of the building, the city glittered under the cold wind. "Are you happy for me?" Ava asked. "Of course," Daniel said quietly. "I just worry. You won't have time to breathe." "I'm breathing right now." "Fool." He shook his head. "No, Ava. You're flying. Breathing happens when your feet touch the ground." She didn't answer. They walked side by side, silent, but between them stretched something thin and fragile, like the mist that floats between two towers in winter. On one side was the vast sky of success. On the other hand, the quiet loneliness of standing at the top. In March, Iron Rose launched its new collection, Resurrection. The show took place right in Times Square, amid neon lights and giant LED screens. Thousands gathered to watch. All of New York fell silent when Ava Taylor stepped onto the stage, wearing a grey coat embroidered with a crimson rose over her heart, the brand symbol. Her voice rang steady through the speakers. "We've all fallen before, but falling isn't the end, it's the beginning of strength." The crowd rose to their feet. Applause thundered through the city. From backstage, Daniel watched her radiant, unstoppable, and felt both pride and fear. She was shining so brightly now. He was afraid the light would take her away, not to someone else, but to the world itself. Later, back at the office, Ava kicked off her heels and sank into a chair. "People think I'm living the dream," she murmured. "But sometimes, I feel like a spectator in my own life." Daniel sat beside her. "Then let me remind you, you're the one who wrote this story. I'm just the man holding the light." "The light holder," she echoed. He nodded. "When you're tired, I light the way. When you shine, I step back so it doesn't blind me." Ava smiled, but her eyes glistened. "Don't you ever get tired, Daniel, of always standing behind me?" "No," he said gently, "because from where I stand, I see you the clearest." The room went still. Ava lowered her head, resting a hand over his. "You talk as if I'm your whole sky." Daniel met her gaze. "No, Ava, you're not the sky. You're the ground, the place I choose to stand, no matter the storm or the Sunday." She didn't speak again. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to rest. Outside, New York sparkled against the glass walls. Inside, two people sat in silence, their heartbeats mingling with the whisper of the wind. They didn't know it yet, but in that fragile moment of peace, the first ripple of a new storm was already stirring in the distance. A storm not born from the sky, but from within, from old ghosts that never really sleep. And somewhere in the city, as snow melted into rain, Ava Taylor, the woman who once walked out of hell, was about to face another battle, not for survival this time, but for her soul. Late October in New York, the city seemed to be holding its breath. The news spoke of the strongest storm in a decade, a massive Atlantic system pushing straight for the coast, with winds up to 120 miles per hour. Every channel repeated the exact words, dangerous and historic. But inside the Iron Rose office, Ava was still working. Her desk was buried under contracts, interview schedules, and expansion plans for Europe. Daniel walked in, looking tired. "How long are you planning to stay? The city's telling people to be home before 8. Just a bit more," Ava said without looking up. "You can go ahead. I'm not leaving if you're still here." Ava finally lifted her eyes. The light reflected off them, bright, but hollow. "Daniel, you know I'm not afraid of storms." "I know," he said softly, "but I'm afraid you'll forget you don't have to be strong alone anymore." She froze. The words pulled her back to that night, years ago, the storm, the soaked green dress, the woman walking away from her old life. "All right," she sighed. 5 more minutes. When they left the building, the wind was howling. The streets were nearly empty, signs swaying, the sky a bruised blue-gray ready to split open. Daniel slipped his coat over her shoulders, buttoning it up to her chin. "Cold?" "Not yet," she said quietly, "but it will be." They had just reached the parking lot when a shadow stepped out from the dark. A voice, rough, familiar, stopped her heart. "Ava." She turned. Under the sickly yellow light stood a man, unshaven, rain-soaked, eyes sunken deep. Ethan Duffy. He looked like a ghost of the man he'd once been, stripped bare of the arrogance, the wealth, the pride. Daniel moved instantly, standing between them. "Who is he?" Ava placed a hand on his shoulder. The past. Ethan took a step closer. I just want to talk. There's nothing to say, Daniel replied. Not to you, Ethan rasped. To her. The wind screamed. The first drops of rain fell hard. Ava stared at Ethan for a long moment, then nodded. 5 minutes. Daniel hesitated, then stepped back toward the car, eyes never leaving her. Ava and Ethan stood face to face in the pouring rain. I've been looking for you for 6 months, Ethan said hoarsely. Did you know? My mother's gone. The company's gone. The house, the friends all gone. They call me a monster, and every night I see you in my dreams that night in the rain, when you said you'd teach me a lesson. Well, you did, Ava. You taught me too well. She didn't move, rain plastering her hair to her face. Is that all you came to say? He shook his head, lips trembling. I came to say I'm sorry. Truly. Too late. I know. However, I can't live with it. The things I said, I discussed myself. I made you into a ghost I've carried for 2 years. Huh. Ava met his gaze, voice calm and cutting. No, Ethan, you didn't turn me into a ghost. You just forced me to see who I really was. You didn't destroy me, you made me live. He staggered. You don't understand. I've lost everything. No, Ethan, she said, shaking her head. You haven't lost. You're just paying. And I don't need to see you crawl to know I'm strong. I've been strong for a long time. Lightning split the sky, and thunder rolled through the city. Ethan fell to his knees, rain mixing with tears. Can you forgive me? Ava looked down at him, her face unreadable. Then, softly, forgiveness isn't to set someone else free. It's to let yourself rest. I forgave you the day I stopped hating you. Ethan looked up, hollow-eyed. Then, are you happy now? Yes, she said. And the saddest part, Ethan, is that you once had that chance but you never knew how to keep it. She turned away and walked toward Daniel. He opened the car door without a word, only met her eyes for a moment, a quiet understanding passing between them. As the car pulled away, Ethan stood alone, a dark silhouette fading into the storm. Rain hammered the windshield as they drove. Streetlights stretched into streaks of gold. Ava leaned her head against the window, silent. Daniel glanced at her. You okay? I'm fine. You sure? You know, she murmured. I thought if I ever saw him again, I'd shake. But I didn't. No anger, no sadness, just nothing. Daniel nodded. That's peace, Ava. When the wound has healed, there's no pain, just a scar reminding you that you survived. She turned, smiling faintly. Thank you for being here. You don't need to thank me. I'm here because I want to be, not because I have to. Outside, the storm grew wilder. The radio warned of an emergency shelter order. They decided to pull over at a rest stop near the Brooklyn Bridge. The car shuddered in the wind. Rain lashed the glass. In the dim light, Daniel reached for her hand. Remember when we first met? It was raining like this. Ava nodded. Back then, you were the one who needed saving. And now? This time, she said, her voice soft but steady. We just save each other. A flash of lightning filled the car with blue light. Daniel drew her close, not with hunger, but with a quiet certainty. Their foreheads touched, hearts beating in rhythm. Ava looked up. Their eyes met. The kiss that followed wasn't the desperate kind of the lost, but the tender sort of the found two souls who'd walked through storms and finally found calm in each other's presence. Outside, the wind roared, but inside, the world stood still. After years of pain, betrayal, and rain, Ava Taylor finally loved again, not because she needed rescuing, but because she had learned how to rescue herself. Morning came clear and gold. Sunlight spilled over the Brooklyn Bridge, glittering on the river like shards of glass. Ava squinted, smiling. See? She said. The storm's over. Daniel nodded. Yeah. And you're still standing stronger than ever. She looked at him. Strong, yes, but not alone anymore. They drove across the bridge, the same path where everything once ended and where everything had begun again. Behind them, Manhattan gleamed iron rows rising tall, proof that even from ruin, something unbreakable could bloom. And somewhere in a narrow alley, Ethan Duffy walked alone, shoes soaked, clutching a faded photograph. He looked up at the clearing sky and whispered half confession, half prayer. Thank you for not destroying me. Low. Then he disappeared into the crowd, a fading footnote in the story of a woman who chose forgiveness not out of weakness, but because she was finally strong enough to live without hate. The third spring after the final storm, New York had changed its skin. White blossoms bloomed along Fifth Avenue, drifting through the air like thin snowflakes. People hurried past, laughing, the sound of horns and cafe music blending into a familiar city rhythm. And amid it all, a new sign glowed in soft gold. Iron Rose. Fifth Avenue flagship. The first flagship store. Ava Taylor's dream is now absolute. She stood inside, looking around. The space was minimalist yet elegant: white walls, high ceilings, warm lights cascading over rows of perfectly hung coats, each piece carrying a story. On the wall, steel letters gleamed. Strength is quiet, beauty is survival. Daniel stepped up behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "They've been lining up since 6 a.m., he said. "I think it's time you greeted them." Ava looked out the window. The crowd stretched down the street, all colors, all ages, young girls, middle-aged women, and even grandmothers leaning on canes. Each held a small steel rose, the same symbol Ava had once handed out for free in Iron Rose's first year. "They're not here for the clothes," she whispered. "They're here because they believe they can rise again." "Oh, and you're the proof," Daniel said. "No," she smiled softly. "We are." The grand opening began: lights, music, applause like gentle rain. Ava stepped out, hair loose, face calm and radiant. "3 years ago," she began, "I had no home, no money, and no faith left in myself. But I had one thing: the will to live differently. And today, I want to tell you this: don't be afraid to start over. Because sometimes, when you think you've lost everything, that's the moment you truly find yourself." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried straight to the heart. Below the stage, Daniel watched her with eyes full of pride and quiet awe. When the speech ended, Ava stepped down into the arms of Naomi, Rosa, and Chloe, the women who'd been there since the beginning. Naomi laughed through tears. "You did it, Ava. I knew you would." Ava hugged her. "I couldn't have without you." And Rosa smiled gently. "And there'd be no Iron Rose without a man who knew how to stand behind the light." Daniel only smiled, the same quiet strength as always. By evening, the store grew still. Sunlight poured through the windows, golden and soft. Ava sat on the steps, slipped off her heels, tilted her face to the sky. Daniel sat beside her. "Tired?" "Yes," she said, "but light." "Why?" "Because I feel done. Not finished, complete." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you think people stop fearing life once they've lost enough?" "I do," he said, "because I'm looking at someone who has." The breeze carried a hint of spring. The sky above them was spotless blue. "The storm's gone," she murmured. "Yeah," Daniel said, "and this sky, it's yours." 1 year later, Iron Rose stood in 4 cities: New York, Los Angeles, Paris, and Seoul. Ava's name filled magazines, yet her life was simpler than ever. She still lived in Brooklyn, in a small 2-story home that had been converted from an old workshop. Out back grew her Iron Rose garden. Handmade metal petals painted a muted red, each one a reminder that even scars can bloom. Daniel always woke up before her, brewing coffee and playing soft jazz. By the time she came downstairs, he'd be on the balcony, sunlight resting on his shoulders. "You're up before the sun again," Ava teased. "Someone has to greet the morning." "Ah, for what?" "To remember that we're still here." They smiled at each other, no grand promises, no drama, just 2 souls who had survived their storms and learned to sit quietly under a clear sky. One morning, Ava received a letter, no return address, only a line written neatly: "Thank you for letting me be forgiven." Inside was an old photograph, their wedding picture. Ethan's face had been torn away. Only hers remained, in white, smiling. Ava looked at it for a long moment, then placed it gently in a drawer, not with sadness, not with joy, just closure. That night, she and Daniel walked along the Brooklyn Bridge. The city shimmered in the distance, the river below glinting with light. "Do you remember the first time you crossed this bridge?" Daniel asked. "Yes. I thought I was walking away from everything. And now? Now I know. Every step I took was actually toward myself." They stood there, quiet. Then Ava turned to him. "Daniel, can I finally say it?" "Say what?" "I love you." He smiled, slow, warm, like sunset light. "I know." "Since when?" "Since before you knew you were already loved." Ava laughed. tears shining in her eyes. "You're the most patient man in the world." "No," he said, "just the luckiest because you chose me, after you chose life." They walked hand in hand across the bridge, the night wind carrying the scent of the river, the city, the world. Behind them, Manhattan glowed, and high above, the Iron Rose logo gleamed silver against the skyline, like lightning frozen in time, not with thunder, but with heartbeat. Ava Taylor paused, looking up at the open sky, and spoke softly, as if closing her own story. "No one is born strong, but anyone can become strong if they dare to walk through the storm once." Daniel squeezed her hand, smiling. "And when the sky clears," he said, "you'll see every storm had its reason." "Well," Ava met his gaze, eyes shining. "Yes, and my reason is you." Then they walked on, side by side, across the bright bridge where an ending met a beginning. When the sky cleared, Ava Taylor had everything. Not gold or fame, but peace. She hadn't sought revenge. She'd lived so well that even those who once hurt her had to bow their heads in silence. And that, my friends, is how a strong woman wins, not by fighting darkness, but by refusing to let it take her light. If you believe that every wound can bloom again, leave A in the comments. So Ava knows that somewhere out there, someone still believes in the miracle of resilience. Like, subscribe, and stay with us, because there are many more stories to tell, of women, of love, and of rebirth after the storm.